Good morning, children. So, welcome to today's class. And today we are going to start chapter 5, Expansion of Delhi Sultanate. So, in our previous class, we have just studied how the Turkish people have invaded India, how they have slowly settled, and how they have established the Delhi Sultanate. So that is Delhi as headquarters, how the sultans have emerged as the emperors of India. So that we have studied. So with few rulers. Now let us study how that Delhi Sultanate has expanded. So with Delhi and in around, some other places around Delhi, they were occupying, and that was a limited area. But later on, it was expanded by many other dynasties. So we studied that, right? There are four dynasties that were majorly, that were majorly responsible for expansion of Delhi Sultanate. So let us see what are those dynasties and how they expanded the Delhi Sultanate and created a vast empire. So, the period from 1206 CE to 1526 CE is known as the period of Delhi Sultanate. So, this period between 1206 CE to till 1526 CE, it was referred as Delhi Sultanate. And we know that there are major dynasties that ruled Delhi Sultanate was Slave Dynasty, Khilji Dynasty, Tughlaq Dynasty, Sayyid Dynasty, and Lodi Dynasty. So almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dynasties. They have ruled Delhi as headquarters and the kings as the sultans. So among these one, two, three, four, five dynasties. So we have last in our previous class we have studied about slave dynasty, right? We have studied about Kutubuddin Aibak being the first dynasty person who was Muhammad Ghori's army general. Later he declared himself as independent after his death. Later under him Iltutmish and all, we studied him. After Kutubuddin Aibak, who was responsible for the formation of slave dynasty, later Jalaluddin Khilji. You know what happened, right? When the last ruler Balban was after the death of Balban, then what happened? The later rulers were weak, and Jalaluddin Khilji, who was also an army general, he occupied Delhi by military coup. So military coup means like with the kind of, so illegally, this man using military, he has, with the help of military support, illegally, this man has taken power from the slave dynasty. Now, after seizing power from slave dynasty, he declared himself as the Sultan of Delhi. So from here onwards, the Kilji dynasty will start ruling the Delhi as headquarter and Jalaluddin Khilji as the Sultan of Delhi. So the second dynasty that ruled Delhi Sultanate was Khilji dynasty. First dynasty was Slave dynasty. So let us start learning about the Khilji dynasty. So the Khiljis were the Turks who had settled in Afghanistan before proceeding to Delhi. That means the Khiljis had their origins from Afghanistan. So before coming to Delhi, they were also Turks. Okay, they were also Turkish people, but they have settled already in Afghanistan. From Afghanistan, they have in later days they have moved slowly to Delhi, and the Khilji dynasty ruled for almost 30 years. So how many years they ruled? 30 years, 1290 to 1320 CE. So the Khiljis were Turkish people, and these people have settled in Afghanistan for many years, and later from Afghanistan, these Turkish people called Khiljis, they have moved to Delhi, and later on they joined as army generals under a slave dynasty and working for as a governor and all. And later on, no, they have revolted. And you know what happened with Balban and all. And after that, they ruled almost for a period of 30 years. So, and coming to the first ruler of Khilji dynasty, Jalaluddin Khilji. Jalaluddin Khilji was the first Sultan of Khilji dynasty, and he had a military coup and captured the throne of Delhi by killing the grandson of Balban. So Balban, who was the last efficient ruler of slave dynasty, after his death, the later rulers of Balban were very weak, especially the grandson of Balban. He was a very, unworthy and a very incapacitated ruler. And because of such incapacity of the grandson of Balban, the Jalaluddin Khilji, who was a governor working under the slave dynasty, he led a military coup. That means he used military and he captured the throne of Delhi by killing the grandson. So, as the grandson was very inefficient and unworthy, he killed him easily, leading a military coup, military campaign against the grandson of Balban. And he by thus he ended the slave dynasty, and Jalaluddin was the person who was responsible for the beginning of Khilji dynasty. And what kind of a person was Jalaluddin Khilji? Jalaluddin was a very compassionate, generous, and had a kind nature. So, what do you mean by compassionate, generous, and kind nature? So, compassionate means a person who always shows sympathy. Okay, compassionate means a person who shows sympathy, so generous and a very kind person. So this kind of nature was seen with Khilji. Personally, he was such a person, and he, however, was not supported by the officers. So under the Sultan, there will be lot of officers working, and these officers, they were non-cooperative with Jalaluddin Khilji. We will see why. So when even though Jalaluddin Khilji came to power of Delhi Sultanate, the officers were they belonged to Balban's government only. So those officers who are working under now they have to work under Kilji, right? Earlier they used to work under Balban. Now they have to work under Kilji. But these officers who are earlier working under Balban government, now they are started non-cooperating with Kilji. But Jalaluddin Khilji pardoned the rebellious nobles. So when they revolted against the Jalaluddin Khilji, the rebellion was suppressed by Jalaluddin, and he pardoned them. That means he has forgiven them, all the nobles, and tried to establish peace. So by peaceful manner, first he suppressed the revolt. Later he didn't made them suffer and all. Later again he had a very peaceful talk with the nobles, and he settled the issue with the nobles, and thus his administrative skill came out for the first time. And during his rule, the Mongols tried to invade India in 1292 CE. However, they withdrew without a fight as Jalaluddin negotiated peace with them. So, the first problem that Jalaluddin Khilji faced was the nobles or the ministers or the officers in his court, that he solved by suppressing the revolt as well as by having a peace talk with those officers. The second problem that Khilji faced was Mongols attack. Even Mongols attack, he handled this issue by having negotiating peace talks with them. Negotiating peace talks means by entering into some kind of peaceful talks or discussions or such kind of talks. So when the talks were successful, naturally the Mongols withdraw the idea of attacking India. So let's not go into very depth why they attacked, what for they attacked, what was the discussion and all that you will learn in your higher classes. And the 6 years rule of Jalaluddin ended in 1296 CE when he was murdered by his nephew Alauddin Khilji. So almost he ruled for a period of 6 years under the dynasty, Khilji dynasty. He ruled for a term of 6 years and he was the founder member of Khilji dynasty. And later he was murdered by his nephew Alauddin Khilji. So nephew means here brothers or sister's son, or sister-in-law or brother-in-law's son. So he was referred as nephew. Jalaluddin's brothers or sister's son, or maybe his brother-in-law or sister-in-law's son, was called nephew, and he was known as Alauddin Khilji. And Alauddin Khilji killed Jalaluddin Khilji and occupied the throne of Delhi. So let us. I told you that Alauddin Khilji killed Ghiyasuddin Khilji, and Jalaluddin Khilji, and he entered into Delhi Sultanate as the next Sultan. So Alauddin Khilji ascended the throne. That means he became the Emperor of Delhi now, and he had won the support of the nobles by bribing them to his side. So already the nobles were with peaceful talks. Jalaluddin Khilji had a very good relation with his nobles, but the nobles were not in favor of even Alauddin Khilji. So what Alauddin Khilji did now? He bribed them. That means by adapting a corrupt practice, that is by giving money or by giving some kind of wealth or some kind of positions, he made all the nobles to support him as the sultan. And Alauddin Khilji did not believe in Jalaluddin's theory of benevolence. So Khilji, he followed a theory of benevolence. What do you mean by benevolence here? Benevolence means anybody or anything can be made as their favor. Anybody can be turned into one's favor by having a peaceful negotiation. That means by talking peacefully, by understanding them, by trying to provide the needs, one can turn an enemy also into a very friendly man. That was the policy of benevolence adopted by Jalaluddin, right? Even when his officers revolted against him, he made peaceful negotiations. But Alauddin Khilji did not believe in such a kind approach towards rebellions. He was a shrewd administrator and is regarded as the greatest Delhi Sultanate monarch. He was a shrewd administrator. Shrewd means a very authoritarian. That means he uses power to suppress anything. That kind of a nature he has. He never uses his skill of peaceful talks and all. He doesn't like all those things. Shrewd administrator means he uses power, a sharp power, to deal the things. And he was also regarded as the greatest Delhi Sultanate monarch, because monarchism means that like he kept all the powers and things under his control, and he always looked others under his authority. He never treated others as his equals. He remained himself as a very authoritarian and a very dictatorial kind of a man. He adhered to Balban's theory of administering through evoking fear and revived the system of spies. So that means he liked even how Balban used to control administration, because Balban appointed many spies to look after know how these ministers and what was going on in his empire and all, to know such information. So he liked that kind of administration. So he also wanted to keep a control on the administration by evoking fear. That means the one should be afraid of the sultan. They must not feel that, oh, the sultan is very kind enough and all. He doesn't like all such things. So he wanted to keep control of everyone in his empire by creating fear among them. And he also brought back the system of spies. These are people who secretly finds out information and pass it on to the sultan. And while continuing the efforts of Balban, Khilji extended the control of Sultanate beyond Delhi to peninsular India. So during the times of Alauddin Khilji, the empire was also extended. So he went on wars with other neighboring kingdoms, especially with the peninsular India. So you might be aware of this thing. In your geography, peninsular India. I'll also show you the map in the next slide, how Khilji's empire was extended, where exactly is this peninsula. So Gujarat, Rajasthan, Malwa, modern day Maharashtra, and Deccan were either brought under his direct control or were compelled to accept Delhi's vassalage. That means Alauddin Khilji followed a two-way policy. One is he directly controlled certain areas like this. Like suppose he almost occupied majority of India, Gujarat, Peninsular India, Malwa, modern day Maharashtra, Deccan areas, all areas were under his control. But he brought all of these areas under his control by two methods. One method is direct control. That means Sultan himself controls all these places. Or compelled, that means forced to accept Delhi's vassalage. That means, what do you mean by vassalage here? So either the kingdoms occupied by Alauddin Khilji will be directly under his control, or they will be forced to accept as to be as a subordinate to Alauddin Khilji. So vassalage means subordinate. So other kingdoms which are far away from Delhi, they cannot be monitored directly under Khilji's control sitting in Delhi because they're very far. Don't know now, I mean, some thousands and lakhs of miles away. This is not possible for one ruler to all the way to go and now look after the affairs. So what he did, even though he appoints some in charges and all, but we cannot trust them. So what he used to do is suppose he occupies a faraway kingdom. That king who has been defeated will be allowed to rule that particular kingdom, but that person has to accept Delhi's authority. So he must come as a subordinate to Delhi's Sultan. So that was his way. Alauddin Khilji unified the whole country and brought it under his control of a powerful central government. So, making Delhi as headquarters, he created a strong central government. And this strong central government, it unified almost all kingdoms in India. And this you can call Alauddin Khilji as the first person to unify India. Earlier, the kingdoms were split into small, and they were scattered. Now, under Alauddin Khilji, for the very first time, the whole country was unified, and he created a strong central government also. That means from Delhi, all the government used to run. So his military campaigns, that means how he extended his empire. If you look at things here, Alauddin Khilji started expanding his territories, first conquering Gujarat. So you can see Gujarat here. So his first conquest was Gujarat. He went and occupied Gujarat, and after Gujarat, he turned his attention towards territories in Rajasthan. So, and what he did, Alauddin attacked the fort of Ranthambore and went on to conquer Chittor, the capital of Mewar. So after Gujarat, his focus shifted to Rajasthan area. You can look at the map here. This was the Gujarat area first he occupied. Later from his he focused on the Rajasthan area. In Rajasthan, he first occupied Ranthambore. Here it is not mentioned, but you can see later. And later he occupied Chittor. You can see Chittor here, and also he occupied the capital of Mewar. So Chittor is the capital of Mewar. So Mewar was a Rajput kingdom, and Alauddin Khilji after Gujarat, his major conquest was this one, that is Rajasthan. In Rajasthan also he occupied Chittor as well as Ranthambore fort. So these two things were the next conquest. And after that, other territories such as Mandu, Dhara, Marwad, Chanderi, Jalore, and Malwa were annexed by Khilji dynasty. So you can see some of these things here. Here you have Malwa. Okay, so this was also part of his conquest. Mandu, Dhara, Marwar, Chandedi, Jalore, and these are all were annexed by Khilji's army. So starting from Gujarat, next to Rajasthan, then to the central part of India, like this, he went on with his expeditions. And after successful campaigns in the northern states, Khilji focused on the Deccan area. Alauddin Khilji was the first Turkish ruler to attack even south. So, this is all the northern part of India. First, he attacked and he occupied all this northern part of India. Later, his focus was on the Deccan region. So, after occupying the Deccan region, he went on to the southern region. So, like this, his conquest happened. You can see the green color portion as areas under Khilji's rule, and this gray color regions are semi-independent. That means he allowed the rulers to rule their kingdoms, but at the same time the rulers have to be loyal to the emperor in Delhi, and these were not under his control. These colors, no, they were independent kingdoms during his times. So this man, Alauddin Khilji, he was the first person to rule southern Indian kingdoms. From Turkish rulers, he was the first person to attack southern Indian territories, and he also occupied those territories. So, all southern India campaigns, that means southern India campaigns. So, wherever there are campaigns, like if you want, so he attacked South Indian kingdoms, right? So, if you want me to name the kingdoms, there are Devagiri, Warangal, Dwara Samudra, Madurai in Tamil Nadu. These all were the southern Indian kingdoms during those days. Now, what he did, Alauddin Khilji, he sent his army general Malik Kafur. Okay, he was a military leader of Alauddin Khilji, Malik Kafur. So he sent Malik Kafur for South India expeditions, and he was successful in it. And with the conquest of many states in the north and South India, almost the entire Indian subcontinent was under Khilji's rule. Just now we have seen map, right? The green color portion North India and the grey color portion as Southern India, the Deccan parts. Now, almost all Indian subcontinent was under Alauddin Khilji. However, Alauddin realized that it is not possible to effectively administer such a large kingdom. So, such large kingdom he cannot control sitting in Delhi. So, it's a very difficult thing. So, what he did, he allowed the Deccan kings to rule their territories. That means he allowed them suppose he occupied all Devagiri king. Devagiri was occupied. Warangal he occupied. Now what Alauddin Khilji did was he allowed the Devagiri king to rule his kingdom. He allowed the Warangal king to rule his kingdom. He allowed the Madurai king to rule his own kingdom. Then you may get doubt. Then why did he defeated them, sir? If you defeat them and again give back the kingdom, then what is the use of attacking them and occupying them? There lies his skill. What he did was, he said, he compelled them to accept the supremacy of Sultan. He said, I am giving you back your power of your kingdom. But what you have to do is, the king of this particular southern India kingdom have to accept the supremacy of Sultan. So they must recognize that yes, they are under the Sultan. They are no more independent kings. Even though they are kings, they are not independent. They have to obey the authority of the emperor in Delhi, and they have to pay him annual tributes. That means every year the king has to visit the court of uh, Kilji or allowed Delhi, and they have to pay him some kind of taxes every year. So thus he was keeping these southern Indian kings also under his control. So Mongol invasions. So these Mongols were very fearful, very cruel warriors who used to attack many places. So as a part of their expeditions, they also tried to attack Delhi Sultanate. And Mongols were considered to be the biggest external threat to Delhi Sultanate. So under Alauddin Khilji, he concluded or he felt that except Mongols from outside India, nobody can dare to defeat Delhi Sultanate. So he was also worried about the Mongol attacks, and they tried to invade Delhi 5 times during the early years of the rule of Alauddin Khilji. So during the early rule of Alauddin Khilji, how many times the Mongols tried to attack? Almost 5 times. However, all attacks were deflected by the strong and powerful army of Kilji. So Khilji's army, it has given a strong setback to Mongols' attack. So the Mongols were not successful for even 5 times attacking Delhi. So because such was a powerful army maintained by Khilji. And Alauddin Khilji was also a great strategist. That means he used to plan very early and very skillfully, and who had implemented strict measures to avert Mongol attacks. That means to prevent the Mongols to attack India or Indian subcontinent, he had adopted a very strict measures so that because of his able administration, Mongols attack to India were unsuccessful even for 5 times. So what did he do for that? He constructed new forts. What do you mean by fort? Fort is a protective wall around the king's territory. So wherever there is a possibility of Mongols trying to enter India, there he built a big walls, huge walls, compound walls you can call, and also he repaired the older ones. So his earlier kings and all, they might have also built some forts, and they got damaged so that it would become easy for the Mongols to enter. Now such old ones were repaired and new ones were constructed by Alauddin Khilji, and powerful generals were placed in frontier provinces. So frontier provinces means the border areas. So what are the measures taken by Alauddin Khilji to prevent Mongol attacks? What he did was he constructed new forts. First thing he did was new forts were constructed, old ones were repaired, powerful generals were employed in some border areas where there is a possibility of Mongols entering into India. And this was the strategy adopted by Alauddin Khilji to prevent Mongol attacks successfully. And about the politics and administration, Alauddin was a great administrator. That means he used his skill to rule this entire Indian subcontinent, such a vast empire, very efficiently. He initiated many reforms which made the empire strong in military. So he brought so many changes. Because of such changes, even the military became very strong during his time. So during the rule of Alauddin Khilji, on one hand, military was very strong and the empire was also financially very sound. That means economically or financially, he made the empire very strong. We will see how he made all these things. And he also thought that large and continuous there is a definitely a large army is needed, and continuous supply for wealth for his military campaigns is also is needed for him. So he planned accordingly. See, he needs a large army. So for that, maintaining large army, he needs lot of wealth. So to have lot of wealth, he has to take continuous expeditions, and also he must keep receiving the taxes properly from his kingdoms. For that, he introduced many reforms, and because of that reforms, he was a very successful sultan. And you can see his administrative skills in this paragraph, like he appointed a wazir, the prime minister, and also you can see modern day, you can compare even modern day, we have prime minister and other ministers to in the administration of the country. So similarly, he also appointed a prime minister and also a minister who defend for all the armies, and also a minister of justice to implement Islamic laws, and also there was also there was also a minister who maintained accounts of the government. So you can now understand how skillful Alauddin Khilji was. He appointed ministers for different departments, and he used to monitor all those departments by speaking directly with those ministers. This kind of system of administration was brought to India for the very first time by Alauddin Khilji. So to make his administration more efficient, Alauddin Khilji passed four ordinances. Ordinances means authoritative orders. That means being Sultan of Delhi, he is passing some orders now. So what are those orders he passed and that made him successful? That we will see now. Alauddin was concerned about the revolts by the nobles and officers in his administration. So he took some stringent measures, that means very strict measures, to curb, means to suppress the rebellions, that means the revolts. So Alauddin Khilji first understood that first he has to set his internal security properly. Internally, within his kingdom, problem would come with the nobles, the ministers. Nobles means the ministers and officers working under him. So Alauddin Khilji realized that internally first he should make his authority very strong. For that, he thought who are the people who would pose him threat. It was nobles and officers in his administration. So first he wanted to take control of all these nobles and officers. So he took some strict measures to keep them under his control. What did he do? Consuming wine was banned in Delhi Sultanate. Those who were found drinking were punished. Alauddin himself gave up the habit of drinking wine. So, what did Alauddin Khilji do to suppress the nobles and officers? He banned consuming of alcohol in his kingdom. That means, see, in what way the nobles and officers can be suppressed by banning alcohol. Those days, these alcohol parties and all used to go, and for these parties, these ministers and officers used to attend, and there they get a chance to gossip about the king and try to plot against the king. So now what he did, consuming wine and alcohol was banned in the empire, so that these ministers and officers they don't party together, and uh, and he avoided those parties, and also that they get a chance to plot against king. So that was his plan. And an elaborate espionage system was set up everywhere to keep a check on nobles and other officials. What do you mean by espionage system? Espionage system means to start to have a spy system. So that means so, espionage system is he brought a very powerful spy system. So, spies are the people who constantly keep a check. That means they constantly monitor where the ministers are going, where the what officials are doing secretly, and they pass it on the information to Sultan. And these spies promptly reported. That means they have correctly reported all the information about the officers to Sultan. Thus, the Sultan was always aware of what was going on with his nobles and officers. So they by this fear, the nobles and officers they are never seen together and no having discussions and parties, because the spies would immediately report this information to Sultan, and Sultan would take that as a very serious issue. So these are the two things which he used, strict orders he passed, and let us see the other strict orders what he passed. So the nobles and officers were barred from marrying into different castes and communities. Barred means they were not allowed. So these ministers and nobles they were not allowed to perform the marriages or have marital associations with any other castes and communities. So that means even so they are from Islamic community, right? They were not allowed to, suppose even in Islam there are Shias and Sunnis and many people. Now these, if you take different religions, we have different people outside in India during those days. So this man Alauddin Khilji kept a ban on these nobles and ministers marrying outside communities. They were also prohibited from attending so they were also prohibited from attending any social gatherings and meetings. So they should not go like partying together. They should not attend together for a meeting and all. Only if the king calls or if the sultan calls, they should attend. Otherwise, they should be doing only their work. They should not have any groupism and all. So, thus he solved majority of his internal affairs very successfully. Internally, he kept control in this manner. and lands that were given as grants were confiscated. That means in those days, instead of paying salaries to them, what did the sultans used to do was they used to give some lands to these ministers or officers and ask them to take income from that and pay remaining as taxes. Now, what Alauddin Khilji did was he confiscated all the lands. That means he took away all the land ownership from these officers and nobles. And what he did was the amounts of grant were decided by Sultan now. The previous the previous whatever lands were there with nobles and officers, they were taken away, and the sultan started deciding how much has to be given to whom, and tax collectors were specially appointed to collect the taxes from landowners. So thus the land revenue was started systematically collection by thus no Alauddin Khilji started a reform even in land, so that he can get a correct amount of taxes without any diversions. So these were the four ordinances or four authoritative orders passed by Alauddin Khilji to keep internal security, to keep all the internal affairs of his kingdom in a strong manner. So, if you look at the land revenue policy of Alauddin Khilji, because he understood that through the land, whatever revenue is coming, that is the major revenue for the entire empire. So, that he was focusing, because unless he gets wealth he cannot maintain a very strong military. So to focus on a proper collection of taxes and wealth, he introduced several land reforms. So what are those land reforms introduced by Alauddin Khilji? First thing he did was confiscated all rent free land gifted to nobles and priests. So what he did was he confiscated all the lands. So earlier he given the sultans have given certain rent free, okay, without paying any rent. He has the sultans of earlier days, they have given gifted, okay, as a gift they have given to all the nobles and priests, and because of this wealth they used to have a very strong authority, and they used to revolt against the sultans. Now he understood this phenomenon, and what he did, he confiscated, means he occupied all those, he took back all those lands which were gifted to nobles and priests, and he added them to the state land. State land means land which belongs to sultan. So in those days, Sultan was the owner of all the lands, and he appointed tax collectors to collect the tax from that land. So now, even from nobles and priests, he took back all the land which was given as gift, and he added that land to the government land or state land. And land was properly assessed, and revenue was fixed at one third of the produce. That means land was properly assessed means which kind of land, suppose if there is a very dry area where agricultural activity was poor, the land fertility capacity is less and production would be less. In such areas, he used to collect less taxes. So wherever the land was very dry, the land assessment used to happen, and they assess that okay, this land is very dry, and you cannot take high taxes here. So he used to fix very less tax. That generally the land revenue was one third from the produce, one third of the produce. That means in total production they have to pay one third as a tax. And in fertile areas, that means where water is present plentifully, the land is very fertile. For example, the Ganga Yamuna Doab region, so where the Ganga and Yamuna rivers flow, in this region the land revenue was fixed as high as half of the total produce. It is not one third now. Now, in fertile areas, as land would be very fertile, and in the river going areas, land would be very fertile, and production also would be very high. He used to collect half of the production as tax in such fertile areas, and it had to be paid in cash. So we will see what is their currency in those days in later part. So this was his land revenue policy, and by doing such changes in land revenue system, what were the changes? He confiscated all the lands which were gifted to priests and nobles. He assessed the revenue as based on the kind of land. So one third was the general tax, and if it is a very fertile area, half was the tax. So 1 by 2 was the tax collected from that particular fertile areas. And that tax also should be paid in the form of cash, not in the form of production. So he also focused his things on reorganization of army. Now, army was an important unit that helps the emperor to maintain his administration very effectively. So he made great efforts to reorganize and reform his armed forces. So he also brought certain changes in the army. What are those changes? He introduced the system of he introduced the system of a descriptive role of each soldier. So what do you mean by descriptive role of each soldier? So that means every soldier is enrolled through a register, and also he'll be having a particular rank, so that he comes to know what kind of position he is taking in army, what was his influence, and how far he can do in army. So all such descriptive role, that means every detail of the soldier is listed in a register, and they used to maintain that. And also further, the cavalry used the dag, or the branding of horses. He knows very well that cavalry, that means army or soldiers who fight wars through horses. Okay, they sit on the horse and they fight in the war. So that kind of army wing was called cavalry. So, and it was called, he introduced a system in cavalry called dhag. What do you mean by dhag? Branding of the horses. That means he knows very well that these horses play a very important role in army. So they can't have a very inefficient horse and all. So he used to brand those horses, and only branded horses which are very strong and efficient in warfare and all. Such horses he used to collect. And for such horses, there was a royal insignia. That means he used to give even royal badges in the name of Sultan. A badge will be allotted for that particular horse based on its strength and the breed, as well as its skill in war and all. So he introduced Dhag system in horses or cavalry. He introduced the system of a descriptive role of each soldier, that means enrolling all the details of the soldiers in a particular register, and espionage system even in army units. So he introduced spies even in the army, so that he wants to know if any army general or somebody was plotting against him. The salaries of the soldiers were reduced and fixed. That means he never paid high salaries to soldiers. They were reduced and they were fixed. In spite, see, you might get worried if they pay less salaries, why would they be very loyal to king? So this I'll answer in the later slide. Even though the salaries are less and they were fixed, the armies were very loyal to Alauddin Khilji. So why, that we will see in the later part of the lesson. So the market regulations. So market regulations were the important reforms brought by this Alauddin Khilji. So Alauddin Khilji, he brought certain market regulations. Market means like it's an open business area where all the buying and selling will happen, right? Which decides the economy or the finances of uh, their king empire. So he was a far-sighted monarch. That means he was having certain future. He was a visionary. That means he can foresee with what decision what impact would. So he was referred as far-sighted monarch, and he was aware of the benefits of having fixed prices. So what he did was, if the prices are fixed, then there would be a lot of benefits for the empire. So let us see what he did. He put a check on the prices so that the soldiers could live within their income. So now did you understand? He made soldiers to live with a very minimum salary, a very less salary, and also fixed salary. Even then, the soldiers were very loyal to Sultan, because if a soldier wants to go out and purchase something, if the prices are increasing and if the salary is less, then there would be a problem. But what Khilji used to do is, he used to monitor the market prices, and he used to keep a check on the prices of the goods and commodities in the market. Especially essential commodities were subsidized and fixed. That means, subsidized means at a very nominal price compared to original price. He used to subsidize for army soldiers and all, and also fixed prices were there. So even though the minimum income was there, with that income they used to get all the essential things required for them, because they were available at a very fixed and at a very cheap price. Suppose, if why salaries would increase, because in market, if prices are increasing, purchasing power should be also increased, so salaries must be increased. Now he fixed the salaries and he lowered, and that too, that salaries were low. But still, as market prices were not changing and purchasing power remains same, then there is no need for them to demand more salaries. So such system of subsidized and fixed prices were maintained by Alauddin Khilji in market. Separate markets known as Shahana-e Mandis were established under the supervision of market superintendents. So he maintained separate markets. Those markets were called Shahanai Mandis. So these mandis were having in charges or superintendents known as Shahana. So even modern day we have same kind of things, right? We have tomato market in our Madanpalli, and we have a tomato market chairman who looks after all the business activity here. Similar kind of thing. A market superintendent called Shahana used to look after each market. And how many kinds of markets were there? Separate markets, three almost. For example, one market for food grains, second for cloth and imported goods. So if you go to one market, you can find all the food grains there. Okay, no other things will be available there. And there is another market where imported goods as well as cloth merchants will be selling and buying things there. And also there was another third market where slaves, horses and cattle were the major goods. So slaves, that means people who are sold. This is human beings selling and buying. So those days slave market was also a big business, and horses were sold here and cattle were also sold here. So thus he separated three markets so that he can easily monitor where the prices were altering and where the problems are arising. So these markets were under constant surveillance, and harsh punishments were meted to those who cheated and indulged in unlawful activities. So in these markets, strict surveillance, that means monitoring used to happen very strictly, so that if anybody is going against law, or if they're trying to cheat the customers and all, they are this surveillance or this spies used to inform this to Sultan and other in charges, so that they can take strict action on them. And also artificial hoarding of the goods, that means they used to mention the list of goods available and the prices also, so that the people come to know what is happening in the market, what is the prices in the market. And also the weights and balances of the merchants were regularly checked. So weights and balances, there is a chance that these people may cheat. So the weights and balances were regularly checked in the market. So thus prices in the market were kept in a fixed way, and thereby helping the soldiers to meet their needs even though they are paid less salaries. Even common people have a great advantage, right? The prices are fixed, so that anytime they don't need to worry, or they don't need to plan that, oh, this time I have got the prices have increased but my salary is not sufficient. So this kind of problems were never there to people and the army during Alauddin Khilji's time. Such was an important market regulation he brought. So Alauddin Khilji demise. Okay, after the death of Alauddin Khilji, what happened? He was followed by a period of political uncertainty. That means there was nobody to replace I mean, it was very difficult to replace somebody who is as powerful as Alauddin Khilji. There was a political uncertainty, means politically there were nobody who can replace Alauddin Khilji. During that time, a war of succession ensued after Khilji's death. That means all the military commanders under his control or the family members of Alauddin Khilji, they all went on a internal war to decide whom to replace Alauddin Khilji. During that time, Malik Kafur, who was his army general, who was successful in southern conquest of Alauddin Khilji, he gradually eliminated his opponents. That means when this internal war of succession means who should be next ruler after Alauddin Khilji broke out. In this internal war of succession, Malik Kafur, the commander of Alauddin Khilji, he got successfully removed all the opponents of him and he proclaimed himself as the emperor. He also, removed the or he also eliminated his, next successor, Khizr Khan, was his blood relation, and also he also could take out eliminate all the Alauddin Khilji's family members and all, and he emerged as a sultan, who Malik Kafur. However, the nobles overthrew him in a month's time. So the ministers who were working under this Alauddin Khilji, they plotted against this Malik Kafur and they have eliminated him also. And later, Mubarak Shah, the last Khilji ruler, ruled for 4 years. So the nobles placed another Khilji ruler called Mubarak Shah, but he also could rule for only 4 years. And after that, he was murdered by his military general Khusro Khan. So when nobles kept Mubarak Shah as Khilji ruler, he could only rule for 4 years, and after that, he was murdered. Mubarak Shah, the Khilji ruler, was murdered by his military general Khusro Khan for power. And after a brief rule, Khusro Khan was overthrown by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, the governor of Dipalpur in Punjab. So now, after Mubarak Shah, Khusro Khan came, and after Khusro Khan, he was completely replaced by Tughlaq, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, who was. So now you tell me, after Alauddin Khilji, the next person to rule was, after Alauddin Khilji, then come Malik Kafur. After Malik Kafur, then came Mubarak Shah, and then after Mubarak Shah, then came Khusro Khan, and after Khusro Khan, the Khilji dynasty ended. Then started Tughlaq dynasty under the leadership of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. So this man Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, he defeated Khusro Khan, and this man Tughlaq, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, was the governor of Dipalpur in Punjab. So like Alauddin Khilji, I mean like Jalaluddin Khilji, who was governor of Bengal those days, who dethroned slave dynasty and occupied Delhi. Like this, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, who was the governor of Dipalpur, he defeated Khusro Khan and occupied Delhi Sultanate, and he was the responsible for the founding of Tughlaq dynasty. So till now we have finished slave dynasty and Khilji dynasty. In the later class we will study about the Tughlaq dynasty.